Tech Podcast studio. We're going to have an opinionated session today. I'm looking forward to this. Taking the gloves off, joined by Claire Ball and Scott Bales. Welcome to the studio. Thanks for coming today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So we have so much we could possibly talk about today. And I think, we're all, I suppose in some people's eyes, outsiders to Asia, even though technically some of us may have come from Asia in certain parts. But we have stories to tell and a few journeys along the way, a few adventures. So what Asia Matters is all about is about sharing with the world why Asia matters, and also sharing with Asia why Asia matters. And we're sort of trying to get over some of the dinosaur mindsets as well that exist out there, and also educate the world. So suddenly people are looking at Asia and thinking, well, we need a piece of the action now. Something's happening over here. So Scott, maybe we can start with yourself. And some of our viewers and listeners may be familiar with you. You pop up a lot on LinkedIn, opinionated. What exactly do you do? What's your day job, if I can put it in those terms?
Yeah, I mean, my day job is I'm the managing director of a boutique advisory firm. We specialize in innovation and digital transformation, called Innovation Labs Asia. I'm most known for, as you said, my points of view on future trends, market forces, technology changes, the future consumer, future markets, and with a kind of a gloves off approach to it. So being a little bit more bold in predictions and basically calling it as I see it.
Yeah, I mean, you're bold in your predictions. I've noticed some of the things that you've said. Do you ever sort of rub people up the wrong way?
Oh yeah, I rubbed an industry up the wrong way last year.
What was the industry you rubbed up?
So based off the announcement of Google's Pixel 2 phone with the eSIM,
right,
basically meant they had the last piece in the puzzle for basically issuing mobile connectivity without the involvement of any telco. And so I, off the basis of that, predicted that the retail telecommunications sector has about 3 years to live.
Right.
And there's a whole underpinning justification for that. It's a longer story in terms of the architecture, the commercial forces. But as a result, it antagonized some people, polarized opinions on the telecommunications sector. But as a result, it got two big clients out of the telco sector from it.
It's a love-hate relationship.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because especially in Asia, not a lot of people step up to the plate and, all the cliches, put their head above the parapet and so on. There's a lot of people who are willing to accept things as they are, but you are quite vocal in, expressing your opinions about things, right? So I think people either love it or hate it. It's not a case of just like or indifference, right? So maybe we can talk a little bit about your background. You're originally from Australia.
Yeah, originally from Melbourne.
Yeah. And how did you get to come to Asia in the first place?
So actually, as a very young student, back to primary school, I was obsessed with Asian culture, and that time was Japan.
Oh, so how old were you when you got into that?
9 years old.
Wow. What was it, the samurai and the ninja and all that?
Well, actually, we had a visiting Japanese exchange student that spent 2 years at our primary school. And I went from zero to semi-proficient in Japanese and got to know Japanese history and the story of the samurai, particularly a book called Bushido, which is the way of the sword and how they govern their lives. And that became a lifelong sort of passion.
Wow. From 9?
From 9, yeah. So as a result, there is Japanese tattoos on my body.
What have you got?
So I have...
We're not going to ask him to show any, understand?
Some of them are more visible than others.
We need the viewers. Come on, Scott.
Yeah, but it basically comes down to, so a samurai in their life will pick their values and virtues from the book Bushido. And you've probably seen the movies when they're perfecting the calligraphy with the long brushes. Yeah. So ultimate enlightenment for a samurai is to find a new way to write the same character. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so I love the story, but I was never going to be into long brush calligraphy. So back in 1996, I was 16 years old, chose 6 virtues, while I was in Japan, had a Japanese calligrapher put them onto rice paper. I still carry those, they're actually on the wall at home. And when I had a moment in my life that embodied that value, I had it tattooed on my body.
Right.
So in order, they are courage, strength, wisdom, love, happiness. I've forgotten the last one. That's terrible.
There's the last one. You didn't get the tattoo.
Oh, honor.
Honor.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, that's the order. And so for instance, the easy one, there's the easy ones. So happiness was actually on the birth of my first kid.
Yeah.
The love one was pretty obvious. I actually, when I got married, in fact, I had it changed from the Japanese character to the Indian Sanskrit character because my wife has Fijian Indian origins. So every there's a story behind every tattoo. And then I went a little bit further, and then when my kids were born, I've got the Chinese characters done, like there's a tiger and a dragon and a horse, and so it just kept going as a story.
Awesome.
But I
It's
mean,
work in progress, isn't it? It's like a tapestry of
yeah, I mean, you find moments in your life where this is important for who I
yeah,
am
yeah,
in my life story. So hopefully, when someone, when I'm gone, they can actually tell back the story
yeah,
on
yeah.
my body. But I mean, what it basically came down to is that love affair carried on throughout.
Mm.
I've tried Japanese, lived in Cambodia, lived in India, attempted multiple languages, pretty much every cuisine in the region. And so basically, I'm the opposite of a banana, if you know what a banana is.
A banana.
So a banana is yellow on the outside,
Yeah,
white on the
yeah.
inside. So they say it's an egg, but no one uses the term egg.
Nobody's discovered that one yet. You're out there.
Yeah.
So doing it. So you moved to Japan in '96. You say?
I went as a visit for a visit.
Oh,
As a student.
first time.
Yeah.
Okay, so '96 you went there, and that's where it kind of all got consolidated for you. Did you have the tattoo doing the Japanese, like the
No, no.
the old
The
school
first
well
one
with the
wasn't
sticks?
done until I actually turned 18 in Melbourne.
Right.
But I had the calligraphy to
Yeah.
copy.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was done back in Melbourne. I think I was 18. The first one came. That was Courage.
Wow, the story. I moved to Japan in 1995, and I originally went out there to teach English, like everybody did back then.
In the Nova School?
No, Geos, their competitor, right? Yeah, so we were the one that lasted about 2 years longer. So I went out there and taught, and it was interesting. If you sort of grew up in the 80s and 90s, like fading off in the 90s, Japan was still very much, the place of opportunity, like maybe China is today. People saw it in the same way. You had Sony and you had National and TDK making those tapes, the 120 tapes. That was a big thing back then. And people saw, Sony was a bit like Apple is today. It was like a real draw, people went there. It was a bit unknown. It was a bit sort of mystical and so on. So how was it like for you when you first went out there?
I mean, my obsession back then was very much about the food. So I love Japanese izakayas. And like, no matter what people build around the world, nothing compares to an izakaya in Tokyo.
Yeah.
But then places like Akihabara, which is the infamous, tech hub, it sort of started the Japanese tech boom in the 90s. Then for instance, like you go out to the areas like Kyoto and where the actual traditional parts of Japan is, absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
But I think one of the biggest probably turners for me is actually, I went with a couple of mates probably around, I want to say 2000. We went up to Niseko when the Aussies had just started building the Grand Hirafu resort and snowed there on Japanese snow for the first time. And I'm like, wow, I'm never snowboarding in Australia ever again.
Yeah.
And everything because you'd get up early in the morning, you'd have your breakfast, you'd be out in this beautifully soft powder. You'd come in at lunch, just, basically board straight into your lodge, chuck off your gear, jump in the onsen with a couple of dudes, and
in the bath,
onsen, have some food, and go back out again. And that was three times a day. And so it just had me really loving some of the cultural infrastructure elements in Japan.
That's really good. I mean, you went quite deep as well. It sounds like you have an appreciation for the culture beyond like the average tourist who sort of just goes Akihabara to look at the cosplay people and all those kind of stuff.
Well, particularly so, like the age, when I first went there, I was semi-fluent in the language, so I could go where tourists couldn't necessarily go.
Right.
I had one limitation though. I had a tattoo by then, so I couldn't go in traditional onsens in Tokyo. Like back in the mid 90s, Tokyo was still very traditional Japan.
Yeah.
It's not the metropolis it is today. So very traditional, very formal. I loved it. But it's a very different city today. It's very westernized. A lot of
they're used to it. Yeah. People with tattoos everywhere now, right? So, all right, we'll dive a little bit more into your adventures. I'm really looking forward to that in a minute. Claire, welcome.
Thank you.
Any tattoos of note?
No tattoos.
Any kanji on your body?
No, but I think I actually didn't know that about Scott, and my fascination with Asia also started with Japan.
Really?
So we can probably thank the...
And you're from Melbourne as well?
Oh, from Melbourne as well.
Yeah.
So I was thinking we could probably thank the state school system for both of our careers. Yeah.
So what happened with you?
I actually was chosen to represent Australia in one of the first children's conventions that was held in Japan in 1994.
Yeah.
So I went over with children from all around the world to Fukuoka, where they had a children's convention. It was all about I guess, sharing your cultures. And I was only 12 years old, and it was my first overseas trip, and I went without my parents. So that really gave me my first massively eye-opening experience. And I just loved Japan. And same with Scott, I was sort of semi-fluent in the language, and then visited a few times after that. And yeah, Japan really was the kickoff point for my fascination.
And then it's a real food hub as well.
Absolutely.
Fukuoka was amazing, some of the food.
Yeah.
I love it there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about what they call like the mozzanabe, you know, the intestine.
Yeah.
Like,
You've
nabe.
got to try everything,
Apart
though,
from
don't
that,
you?
the smell is a bit off-putting, but I love all the other stuff.
Yeah.
Awesome. So you came to Japan when you were 12?
Yeah, I came to Japan when I was 12, and then I probably went a few more times during high school.
Yeah.
And after I graduated, I traveled a lot through Asia, and I then spent my honeymoon on the Trans-Siberian Railway from China through Russia and Mongolia. So I went to Mongolia on my honeymoon.
Yeah.
It's a little bit random.
No, is it random though? I mean, it's a lot more interesting than maybe going some of the places people go, Hawaii, you know?
Yeah, it's just one of the most interesting places to visit because it's not like anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
It's so underdeveloped and so interesting to visit. And, you know, you've never seen it before. I felt you might visit places in Europe, and I feel like I'd been there because everyone's seen the Eiffel Tower, or the Leaning Tower of Pisa in a poster, and you get there and it looks just like that. Whereas in Mongolia, it's a completely new experience, and the people and the food and just the feel of the whole country is something undocumented.
Wow. I've never been. Talking of Mongolia, I think it's one of the two, am I right, one of the two places in Asia, if I get my facts right, Scott, one of the two places in Asia you haven't worked or you haven't been?
Haven't worked.
Haven't
been as well, yeah.
So there are only two countries, Mongolia
and Bhutan.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, so let me understand it. How many countries are there in Asia? There must be lots. Okay.
50, I suppose.
50. And you've worked in every single one apart from these two?
Yeah, pretty much, yep. Yeah. You know, my career has really been usually in regional jobs or global jobs. So I've been very fortunate to go to some places you wouldn't even consider going.
Right, like, try me.
Afghanistan, Pakistan.
Yeah, maybe not.
Nigeria. Yeah. That's outside Asia now, but basically getting exposure to markets that would not normally be on your travel routes, but more from a work perspective. And so you get involved with locals, you have local partners, and you get a chance to experience local customs. So it's actually that time that sort of helped me build. I have a deep bias towards local empathy. That's probably why I'm good at my job. And so I basically say, you know, don't take me to, I'm going down to you know, Karachi in Pakistan. Yeah. Don't take me to the fancy Italian restaurant at the hotel. Take me to where you like to eat. Where's your favorite place to eat? I don't care how rough or how risky you think it is for a white guy. Take me there.
And what's that like when you go Karachi to the street stall and you're the white guy there? And is it as you expect? Are people warm to you? Are they welcoming? What's the sort of... Can you tell us a story about your experience in doing that?
Yeah, well, you're a bit of a novelty. So in 2010, I was working for a South African company called Fundamo. We were trying to negotiate a deal in Pakistan with Nokia to do Nokia Money's extension into that market. A couple of days on the ground, you know, all the hotels are fully fortified. You know, security behind machine guns and 50-foot walls. But we had to actually empathize with the market to understand, you know, what we're potentially doing. So we went out to like mobile phone markets and learn how to buy a phone. And so as simple practice, I was going into the business partner I was with, I won't name the company, but their security personnel wouldn't let them go into the market because it was seen too risky. I'm like, hell with this. I'm going in, buying cell phones, selling cell phones, buying SIM cards, putting them in, trying to activate services just to get a feel for what it's like on the market. You know, how they live on a daily basis. And what are price sensitivities? What are the popular devices? What questions do they ask when they buy a phone? So that was the part of the day part. And then in the night, we said, look, don't take us to the fancy restaurant. Take us where you want to go. And so we went to a place called Food Street in Karachi, which is literally, I think, open air hawker center without the tables. It's just like an open air dirt and gravel car park with food stalls all around. Right. And I tried a dish called Nahari Special, is the translation. And so Pakistan's national dish is a slow cooked beef curry. Think like rendang, but more curry-like. But then they mix in spinal cord and bone marrow.
Wow. Or to give it some body, really, literally.
And then have this amazing Pakistani bread that you break off and eat it with. And it was just the best experience. And like, if I didn't have the bravery to go beyond the fancy restaurant, we never would have experienced it. Then they took us to Burns Road for a Pakistani dessert called robbery. Again, fascinating experience. All these people wondering why there's a white guy in a really local neighborhood. And then we went to a chai place down by the beach, and there's people doing camel rides on the beach, and we're here busy having our chai. It was a really, really eye-opening experience. It was particularly, let's say, for the people that hadn't been there and didn't have the adventurous spirit, it was quite confronting to think, oh, you're going to Pakistan?
Yeah.
I mean, I was on the ground when Bin Laden I was in Islamabad, 110 kilometers away when Bin Laden was killed. And so you can imagine family and friends going, what the hell are you doing?
Did you ever think that yourself?
No, never. Because you know what? In Islamabad that night, we didn't even know what happened. We had no idea. Unless you turned on CNN, you had no idea what happened the night before. And so I've taken that, I mean, particularly like there's, scarier places like, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, some other, countries where similar scenarios. But you build up a self-awareness, you build up an affinity. And I think the one thing that sort of really changed it for me was a moment when we actually arrived, my first time ever arriving into Karachi. And again, I was arriving with the exact same business partner. They get out of the airplane. They're immediately met by 6 armed guards at the plane door, escorted through security, VIP, into a 4-car convoy to get to their hotel. My little local guy picks me up at the other side of immigration in his little family sedan, and he goes, "See your friend over there? He's the one that's going to be the target, not you."
That's smart. Yeah. You mentioned, Scott, empathy. I think this is a really important word, and it's appearing in business pattern. I've seen, for example, like in the Apple Genius manual. So if you walk into an Apple store and you talk to a Genius employee, they have a manual, and apparently it mentions the word empathy like 25 times. And, it's like it keeps coming up: empathy, empathy, empathy. So business leaders are sort of understanding that there is something here. What is this empathy thing? What exactly is it, and where can you learn it?
Yeah, empathy is a hard thing to learn, but it's more of a mindset. In that, so a lot of my clients, we deal with a principle called Lean Startup, particularly the corporate version of that called Lean Enterprise. And the first principle of Lean Enterprise is assume you know nothing. So we're basically trying to reinvoke curiosity, investigation, experimentation.
Right.
And so empathy is basically saying you've made a first-hand effort to understand somebody's context, background, culture before you make any judgment or any assumptions around how you might solve their need. One of the biggest challenges, particularly with a lot of my large American, European, Australian clients that come to Asia, they think that a European insurance policy is going to immediately fit straight into Indonesia. And it doesn't work. They can't sell anything. It's not viable. Or it's a big, large tech giant from the US or Canada comes in, oh, this is going to work in Thailand. We'll just plonk it in. And they struggle to make that connection that actually somebody else's, that part of the world has a different context, different cultural means, different social means, financial means. And so empathy is a key principle, particularly in, probably the best book to describe it is Steve Blank wrote a book called The 4 Steps to Epiphany. And the first 2 steps are really about customer search. And that's all about empathy, objective-based investigation, understand people, explore from a point of hypotheses, not judgment.
But do you need to be a certain type of person for that to work? Because I imagine these are skills, or are they skills? Are they personality types, or what do you think?
I mean, I think curiosity is a personality type. Yeah. That's definitely. That's a hard part of the cultural and mindset change in most corporates. But I think the bigger challenge actually in empathy is what we call incumbent bias. And so Clayton Christensen particularly picks up this quite well, is that just because you have 30 years experience in doing something doesn't mean you know how to do it today. And if you can get over that hurdle, you start re-asking some fundamental questions. So if you look at a lot of the product DNA in Apple, particularly in their ideation process, all they did was re-ask the same fundamental questions on a product or service.
Yeah.
Where if you look at almost any industry today, they're still based on paradigms or principles that are decades old.
Agreed.
And so, for instance, we say that if you were to re-ask, let's say insurance, for example, if you were to re-ask the core tenets and questions that make insurance as a product today, using today's resources, today's mindset, today's context, you probably would have a very different product at the other end.
I look at the recent developments here in Southeast Asia as an example, comparing Grab and Uber.
Yep.
And some people have mooted the idea that maybe Uber lacked the empathy to work in Asia. I'm just curious of whether, I mean, as somebody who sort of looks at that level, top level, rather than looking at the nuts and bolts of what probably happened in the apps and the products and so on, what do you think? Was there a sense of that going on? Or why do you think Grab was successful and Uber maybe wasn't?
Yes, I think, I mean, this is this is a topic I've been trying to follow for a couple of months now, and that I don't think Uber lacked empathy for the market. They just had HQ distractions that distracted them from on the ground operations. Yeah. We all watched the the news and saw various let's say not nice
backstabbing
coming out from investors, from the board, from CEOs, and that became a distraction of the business. So they had to reconsolidate. They also challenged profitability. I don't think Uber lacked any empathy for the market. In fact, I go as far as to say I almost think there was a conspiracy theory behind the Grab Uber deal, but we'll come to that later.
Interesting.
I mean, Anthony Tan, the founder of Grab, really smart guy, really well connected, comes from a good background in Malaysia, so he did have local context. He had the right relationships, and his design principle was very different, because the design principle of the two companies is totally different. Uber is designed for everybody's private driver. So it's about how do you make something that was previously very limited access become access to the masses. So their brand was basically about the passenger. So I interviewed Anthony Tan on stage at Echelon a couple of years ago, and he spoke about the design principles of Grab is actually about the driver. So actually the core design principle that created Grab was the bladder of a taxi driver. So urinary tract infections is quite high in taxi drivers because they'll avoid going to the toilet during peak revenue periods because they can't take the dispatch box with them to the toilet.
Right.
And so basically it became about how do you make him still be able to accept jobs while still attending to daily life. And so it came down to around how can he still play with his kids or get food or go to the toilet while still accepting jobs. And that's the core design principle under Grab, is that it appealed to the entrepreneurial spirit, which is an Asian thing, of the driver. And that's why it was very successful. So they're successful from two different angles.
Yeah, I heard that the Uber algorithm rewarded, back-to-back booking. So somebody would do 12 hours straight without going to the bathroom, as an example, right? So maybe that was what was going on.
Except the fact, you could take your phone with you, so you technically can take your dispatch box with you. Right. Or if you drive a comfort taxi today and you want to go to the bathroom, you have to leave the device that gives you revenue behind.
There you go. Insights. Claire, you've recently moved to Asia. How long are you into your Asian odyssey this time?
I'm only 6 months.
6 months.
Asian odyssey.
Yeah.
And I think I've been thinking about the Grab and Uber thing from a customer perspective. I think why Grab has done so well is it's got the payments ecosystem around it. So coming from Australia, which I'd consider quite a highly developed country, I come here and I think it's amazing that I can order a Grab on my phone and then I can go to the coffee shop and pay with a QR code on my phone for the coffee. And if I've forgotten my wallet or my credit card anywhere in Singapore, I don't even worry about it for 1 second, because there's the payment ecosystem around Grab, and I find that ease of payments just great. Like it's such a big change from Australia.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that. So not just Australia, let's not single out Australia. Yes. I know you're qualified and you have the authority to speak on behalf of your nation.
Absolutely.
That whole idea about people sort of, experiencing Asia, coming here maybe, and sometimes having their minds blown.
Yeah.
There's certain things we see in technology. There's a lot talked about with China now in payments and so on. Do people get it, what's going on in Asia at the moment? I mean, we're at a pivotal stage as well. I mean, let's talk about with your experience personally first, and then Scott, maybe you can give us sort of the more sort of global look. So with your experience coming to Asia, did you, I know you were experienced in Asia before, obviously, with Japan you talked about.
Yeah.
Were you ready for how things have sort of moved on here, how advanced it was?
No. My experience in Japan, I thought that was very technologically advanced. I remember being in a car with my host family, and they had a television in the dashboard of their car in the 90s. And wow, I thought that was amazing. But coming even to Singapore, the level of digitization as a citizen of the country, as a consumer, it's really blown my mind. Obviously I knew those technologies existed, but the level to which they've been implemented and integrated in Singapore to actually make my life easier on a lot of different levels, that's what I've really been blown away
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very positive, isn't it?
It
in
is
that
very,
respect?
it's a very positive experience,
Yeah,
definitely.
it's how it could be. We should all
It is.
sample it and see, well, this is how it should work. Or
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, I've been thinking a lot about Asia. You know, is that because there weren't the systems there before? There's been such a great opportunity
yeah.
to build an ecosystem of digitization around your daily life, whereas in other countries, there's so many, I guess, old generation technology and systems in place. You're trying to net everything together. Whereas Asia has just been able to leapfrog and come so far forward because there's been an opportunity to build something, and it's about empathy and customer centricity. They've built it for the people in their country.
Yeah.
So I mean, I can see that the systems in Singapore have been built for Singapore life and Singapore people, which is great to experience.
Yeah, let's talk about that in the context of what's happening on the global stage and people understanding Asia from that perspective. And we're at a very interesting time. We let's have a look at sort of the input data, if you like. You have now more investment going into VC investment going into Chinese startups than American, which is a seminal moment, I suppose, in the startup world. You have, Asia now does more trade with itself than it does with the rest of the world, and you have then the middle classes. You have this thing where by 2030, 2/3 of the world's middle class will be here in Asia. So there's a lot of sort of input data which is sort of signaling something's happening out there, and somebody has to kind of join the dots and help us understand. When you go, Scott, and talk to people outside of Asia looking in, and I guess you speak on a global stage, a lot of people interested in Asia. We need a piece of the action. What's going on in Asia, Scott? How do you sort of help them understand what's happening, and especially from the empathy side, that this is no longer about knockoff shoes and cheap t-shirts, right? There's a lot more going on.
I think you hit on the nail ahead there in saying that empathy is the key challenge here. It's just because you're successful in the US or Europe doesn't mean you're going to be successful in Asia. And I think one of the key reasons you're seeing particularly Chinese startups grow so fast is because they are Asian. They understand the region better than anybody else. So you may have a really cool tech out of Germany or wherever it is, but if you haven't made the effort to figure out what the go-to-market strategy is in context of that market's needs and preferences, your ability to survive is actually going to be quite limited. And so we're seeing this particularly in traditional industries of insurance, of healthcare, and blah, 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 where they're struggling to make progress, where you look at companies like Alibaba, Tencent, Xiaomi, they're being so successful because their DNA is Asia. Their hunger is in Asian hunger. Their entrepreneurialism is there at a core level. And so you'll probably see, you'll see more of Asia serving Asia in the coming years, unless the West can wake up to realize, actually, you know what, we don't understand Asia. Far too many times they talk in generalizations or statistics. They've never been there.
Yeah.
Like I was dealing with an American client about a year ago. It's like, yeah, we want to spend $65 million going to Asia. And I'm like, so where in Asia? Asia.
Yeah, just Asia,
all
like,
of it. So how many have you been to any Asian city? And like no one raised their hand. You're like, so you want to go and spend $65 million in a market you've never been to? So in the old era, you could throw money at something and be semi-successful. The return models will be there, and so forth. I mean, unless you empathize now, unless you know your customer better than your competitor, you're behind the eight ball. And so that's going to be a key challenge, particularly for Western companies, is around how do they find the empathy muscle to understand these markets to actually build opportunity. And so I particularly look. Indonesia is a massively tapped opportunity from technology, financial services, education, media. But it has Indonesian-specific problems around connectivity, infrastructure, economics. Like there's all these challenges that are specific to Indonesia that very few people have taken the time to understand.
Yeah, and it's a big market. People don't realize, 270 million people?
Yeah, 17,000 islands, very basic connectivity levels. I think they're the largest consumer of mobile internet per capita on the planet.
Yeah.
And so if you don't go in with a mobile-centric deployment, you're already behind.
Yeah. So take an example. I know you mentioned insurance without getting into specifics, but if you take, there must be, the traditional insurance players like the AXAs and the AIGs coming into these markets like Indonesia. Yeah. And saying, there's a lot of people for the first time who need home insurance, car insurance, life insurance, all this sort of thing. And then you've mentioned people like Alibaba, who are effectively now getting into these spaces as well. Like they are becoming fintech companies with payments, and I'm sure they have an insurance arm as well. All converging in this area, like Southeast Asia. Take someone like Indonesia. Are the Alibabas of this world more empathic? Is that the word? Empathetic.
Empathetic.
Yeah.
Are they more than these sort of old school players? What's happening when you see these head up against each other?
So you made you made reference to one of the key words. So the first is need, the next is means, and the next is will. So unless you get those three things in order, it's very hard to go to any market. So the first is need. Most, I'd say 90% of Indonesians are not even aware of insurance, let alone a need for it. So that's basically an awareness issue before you even think about selling a product.
Right.
The next is having the means. Like in the way you distribute and sell your product, do they have the means to even buy that product? And then last, do they have the desire to buy the product? And so stepping through those three steps requires deep empathy for the context of the market you're going after. And so if I take, like, for instance, a typical annual health premium, where it's an annual policy for your health insurance, you can't sell an annual premium in Indonesia. Nobody has that amount of disposable cash on them except the ultra net worth, high net worth. So you need to think about a distribution model that's more like a WeChat or an Alibaba, where it's more about the microtization of a larger risk unit. So suddenly you're selling health insurance in like 7 days, 14 days, 1 month units linked to people's cash flow. So there's a really great book called The Portfolios of the Poor, and it talks about how they manage their money. And what it basically says is, even though these people are poorer, they have a higher velocity of what's called cash flow. So they use a larger number of instruments at a higher frequency to manage the ins and outs of their household or their life. So as a result, they can afford things in small buckets. So you can't sell them an annual premium. You can't sell them any big large ticket items. In fact, the only way they can do that is what they typically do will go and get a loan from a loan shark or a lending office, and then use that loan as a form of forced savings. So they have to make those payments back to buy a motorbike or to buy this season's harvest for their rice farm. And so they have forced saving mechanisms using insurance in a very different way. And so unless the insurance company reevaluates that, they're going to struggle. A good example was in Kuala Lumpur, in Metropolitan Kuala Lumpur, it's mandatory to have minimum third-party insurance for all automotive vehicles, cars and motorbikes. And so Maxis, the telco, did a partnership with an insurance company. I think it was HSBC Insurance. Don't quote me on that, but you could actually buy it using airtime credits on 1 day, 3 day, or 7 day units. So it meant that, okay, if you lived outside Metropolitan KL, you could come and get third-party insurance for your motorbike just for the day you're in town. That suits the market, and as a result, they saw a massive spike in policies.
So why aren't the Axis and the AIGs, and they may be doing it, but why aren't they sort of out there doing this? Is it not in their DNA?
The short answer is no.
Okay. Give us a longer answer as well. Is there hope?
So one of the things we're trying to particularly look at right now, from a research perspective, is a correlation between product R&D and executive KPIs. Most C-level suite executives are very short-term motivated, particularly around shareholder value. That's why most profits go to buybacks, dividends, and so forth, so their shareholders looked after. And so hence their internal KPIs, or the numbers they're following, are very internally focused. That's not a great basis to empathize for a market.
Right.
Where if you look at companies like Amazon, Netflix, iFlix in Malaysia as well, all of their metrics are customer value oriented. And so that creates a bias internally around the customer that allows them to essentially speak on the customer's behalf in every single discussion. It could be a meeting, the board meeting, a water cooler conversation. It's deliberately instilled into every single moment. Jeff Bezos is famous for having the empty chair principle. So in every meeting at Amazon, you're meant to have an empty chair that's meant to represent the customer. Very few traditional companies actually do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing example as well. You bring up Amazon, and I think about their prospects here, right, in Singapore, right? I mean, Amazon versus Alibaba is an interesting prospect because those are probably two of the best from each respective region. How do you see those sort of go up against each other? I mean, Amazon has Amazon Prime Now here in Singapore, which is a 2-hour delivery, but you can't actively go on to the website online and order. So it's sort of very closed, almost like a test focus group. Yeah. Sort of study for Amazon, see if it's going to work in Singapore. You have Lazada in the space, and you have Alibaba sitting outside funneling their resources in through different means. How do you see that sort of working out? I mean, as Singapore as a test market for probably the first time those two guys are going to go up against each other, how do you see them sort of working out?
So the really smart strategists realize that it's not about Amazon versus Alibaba. It's actually an ecosystem play. So in all markets now, particularly as we carry these devices around, the ecosystem in our daily life is vitally important for measuring consumer behavior, knowing intent, basically so we can be there when you're ready to make a choice. And so Alibaba and Amazon know that intuitively now is around how do we get better at predicting what you might want. Google's doing that, Apple's trying to do that as well. And so eventually we become about an ecosystem in your life. So the diversification, particularly in their Grab product suite, is a fantastic push towards an ecosystem business, not just a product or service. But I think you're going to see Amazon and Alibaba be key rivals for a long, long period of time, particularly Lazada versus Amazon in the e-commerce space. But more importantly, they're going to create pressure, particularly back into traditional segments. So if you look at physical retail in Asia, it's still very much a thriving business. Malls are growing because, emerging affluent is still growing in this region. It's not like a saturated market like Australia, Europe, or the US. The amount of affluence and disposable income, the affinity for higher, affluence brands and so forth is still there. So we're still going to see the consumer spend going up. The hard part is where does it get spent? Do you want to go and buy your Louis Vuitton at the flagship store on Orchard Road, or are you going to buy it online? Now, there's the brands have different rules for that. The ecosystem has different rules for that. Even the strategies behind it at a town planning level have different strategies for that. But those things are going to come into play when it comes to knowing, Lazada versus Zalora versus Amazon versus, all the various e-commerce players.
And just on that note, with looking at the consumers or the customers, is that, I spent a lot of time in telecoms for many years, and I would go to different markets talking about young people and mobile phones. And whether it was a knee-jerk reaction or it was genuine, one of the first things that people say is, well, you did your research in all these different markets, but we're different here. Young people in this market, could be Malaysia, could be Pakistan, they're different. And what I was trying to do is always convince people that there are more similarities than differences, and there are different levels of differences. How do you see that? Sort of sitting across very many different markets, that reaction, is that valid as a criticism of being sort of taking a global perspective and taking like insights from different markets?
So yes and no. I'll go the yes. Do you remember Kotler? He wrote the Marketing 101. Everyone read that book. The 4 Ps, the 6 Ps, whichever one you subscribe to. Yeah. Those principles actually still apply today. And you'll actually look at that. A lot of that actually is a model for actually understanding and documenting the needs of a particular product or service or market. If you could take health insurance in Indonesia, the 6 Ps is actually a pretty good market for a way of understanding and empathizing for how you might put an insurance product in that market. The challenge is the more bias you create in assuming you know things up front, the less likely you're to open to hypothesis and then wanting to test them. So while there is models, there is similarities, I actually want people to be in the habit of going through the investigative process of empathy. I think it's vitally important for actually understanding, getting out in the street, understanding the concept. Like I still say today, the most rewarding projects I've ever worked on is when I take a C-suite or a decision maker firsthand to speak to a customer. They always find out something they've never, like...
Do you see them trembling before they do it?
No, because they always get told something like, why has my team not told me this?
Yeah.
And
it's amazing, isn't it?
It's just, the industrial age hierarchy, which, governs pretty much every publicly listed company on the planet today, only pushes good news up. It doesn't give, tangential information, doesn't give bad news. When a customer complains, it doesn't go up. Like I'm surprised more C-suites aren't now obligated to do basically customer complaint reviews.
Yeah, it's like community service. They should do this as a part of earning their wings. Like you've got to do 100 hours talking to angry customers.
But the second part of that is, and this is the biggest Achilles heel in most incumbent organizations. You go work for a bank or a telco here as a senior executive, you get VIP access to product onboarding and products and so forth. So you don't have to sign up as a normal customer. As a result, you don't feel the pain points of your own customer. And that then creates this distancing from your customer base. If you've never felt the pain of going and queuing up at StarHub, you should not be a StarHub executive.
Do you think they'll buy that? This is the new training program. We're going to take all you lot out to the retail store. They shouldn't they?
Yeah. If I want to say, if you want the best source of ideas in an organization to improve it, one, empower your current customer-facing staff to have the confidence to raise bad news.
Yeah.
The second part, remove all executive privileges. And straight away, I guarantee within 1 quarter, you'll have a massive portfolio of complaints to address.
Yeah.
And guess what? That queuing issue at StarHub will be fixed
It'll
pretty
be dealt
quickly.
with, yeah, absolutely. So I had on the show not too long ago, Blake Larson from Lala Move, and he was telling me, because obviously Lala Move are expanding in all these different markets out of Hong Kong. And when he went to Thailand, it was a very similar story. He was saying about the empathy thing. He said what he did, obviously you could go to Thailand and say, right, we understand Thailand, or we could do our focus group, But what he did was he grabbed a bunch of business cards and he went down to the taxi ranks, because these were the taxi drivers were the delivery drivers for them. They were a last mile logistics company. And he went down there and he thought, well, I'm going to take these business cards down and hand them out. And he thought, I'm not going to hand these out. I'm just going to sit here. And he sat with the taxi drivers. He stood at the taxi ranks, and they just all kind of hang out. They don't get like foreigners go and hang out there. And he just went and hang out there for the day. He said that was the best research I ever did, because by doing that, I really understand like how these guys think, the pain, as you mentioned, that they feel. And I wonder how many sort of C-suite executives would volunteer themselves to do this. This is a challenge that we have.
Very, very, very few. We in our services and products, we mandate that, particularly key decision makers. That if you're the executive sponsor that's sponsoring an innovation program, unless you're prepared to do first-hand research with us, don't bother, because you're just going to perpetuate your own bias into our programs.
Tell us the good news, Scott. There you go. Okay, I'm just rounding up. Claire, when you go back to Australia, do you think living in Singapore or a place like this has helped you understand Australia a little bit better? Does it sort of shape your
a little bit better. I think that I feel like I've got a lot more global understanding from being in Singapore. I think Australia, just through pure geography and the fact that it's 7 hours and thousands of dollars to leave, means that you don't have an understanding of Asia and the world and what that means as much. When you're in Australia, you're almost inside a little bit of a bubble.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I've now got a great appreciation for how far Asia has come and how fantastic it is here. And I would almost, be going back to Australia saying to everyone, you really need to get on board with this. Like we're somewhat part of Asia now. We're so close. It's the closest place you can get to. And there's so many opportunities here. It really is an area of opportunity for Australia.
So let's say you go back. Let's talk about a little bit of advice. Like ending up with one piece of advice. You go back to Australia. You're speaking to C-level executive in a coffee chain in Melbourne. They want to go global. There's heavy competition locally. Going into Asia, what's the one thing that they can do? The quick win. I know it's putting you on the spot, a little bit of an ambush, but I'm sure you've got a throwaway idea you can give them. Like, do they get their backpack on, one-way ticket to Kazakhstan or to Pakistan? Or how do they kind of understand it? What do they do here?
So, my tip always is exactly, it's got nothing to do with business. If you want to do business in a market, make sure you've made the effort to try their national dish, their local customs, not in a fancy restaurant or hotel. Like, get out there and, like, in Singapore, try hawker food, go sing karaoke, experience what it's like here through the eyes of a local. Don't just hang out with, other expats and foreigners. Actually get out there and try some of the local things. Yeah,
that's awesome advice. I wonder how many follow through on that. It's the challenge, isn't it? Actually, just on that note, I was in Newton Hawker Centre. I know it's a little bit sort of an upgraded
one.
Yeah, but I was in there not too long ago after doing a show, and couple sat down next to me and they said, can they sit down? I said, fine. It was a bit busy. I moved my jacket and they sat down there and they started talking away, and I was with a friend. What do you do? He started asking us, what do you do? And my friend said, I make medical devices, and I want to be the Apple of medical devices. He was having a chat and he asked me, what do I do? I run a podcast about this. And I was just sort of eating away, and I said, what do you do? And he says, I own an airline. And it was like Tony Fernandez from AirAsia sitting there. Yeah. And I thought it was just interesting you talk about empathy, and you say going and trying the hawker food. If you want to run a service industry, especially, or an industry where, you can spend billions on branding, but at the end of the day, it's that DNA, isn't it? Or that empathy that you've mentioned.
And that's
how important that is.
That's why the best leaders really are those that firsthand, get amongst it. Like I said, everyone, go back to your Thai example. If you want to enter Thailand, go and try the intestinal noodles in Soy Convent. by yourself. Like, don't get a local guide.
It's a challenge.
It's a challenge. Like, first you got to find soy convent, then you got to read the signs to find out which is the intestinal noodles. Then you've actually got to have the balls to eat intestinal noodles.
I'm going to hashtag Scott's challenge. Let's see who picks it up. Hey guys, it's been really inspirational speaking to you, and I love speaking to people who I would class in the category of adventurer, people who put themselves out there as well, step outside the comfort zone. It's inspirational because I think people listen to that, and you know, maybe your stories in a way are the seed planted in their head for them to get out and do stuff as well. The window seat, so to speak, of all those people back home, if I can still use those terms, who are thinking about Asia. You can get out and do this stuff. So thank you so much for coming and sharing.
And more than Patong Beach and Kuta.
That's another story, another podcast. Claire Wall, Scott Bales, thank you so much for coming on and sharing today. Fantastic.
Thank you so much.